Goes on the road.
Good morning. This is Bill Klingberg with SCORE. Welcome to our webinar on the Small Business Guide for Food and Drink Establishments. First, some housekeeping. I don't know what you guys know about SCORE, but here in Houston, we have 150 members from different industries and different backgrounds. We have lawyers, we have accountants, we have sales and marketing, manufacturing. The key to SCORE is to find a mentor who has been there and done what you're trying to do and can help guide you so that you don't make the same mistakes that we did 20 years ago. There's 11,000 of us nationwide, and so actually, in a virtual sense, we're not just Houston. Everything is controlled from SCORE from our website, houston.score.org. You'll find an awful lot of things there, from find a mentor to take a workshop to our library. There'll be, for those of you new, there'll be a slide later at the end that'll reiterate that, and you can write it down then. Please put your questions into the Q&A button at the bottom. This will be monitored, and the presenters, there are two of them, will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. There is also a poll question, actually two questions, one poll. One asks you to rate the webinar that you just attended, pardon me, and one talks about getting a mentor and the various ways that you can do that. And so that will be launched near the end of the presentation also. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Ann DeBellina, and she'll take it away. Cheers,
Okay.
Ann.
Thanks, Bill. So I'll go ahead and just give a quick overview of the agenda for today. We'll go through some, this is specific for Houston kind of food and drink establishments. We'll look a little bit at current market outlook and customer trends. Then we'll talk through some practical tips, kind of immediate to long-term considerations. Willie will talk through some of the perspectives from local restaurateurs, from SCORE members, and share some resources. And then finally, there's a lot of additional resources that we'll direct you to. All of this will eventually go into about a 20-page guidebook, and we'll send out that PDF in the next week to all of you. So we're just highlighting some of the content here and hope you find some useful things and look forward to a good discussion today. So just a quick background on Willie and myself. Willie, would you want to introduce yourself quickly here?
You go ahead first.
Okay, great. So I'm with a firm called Oliver Wyman. It's a management consulting firm. I'll tell a little more on Oliver Wyman on the next page, but really my background is in consulting and also sales and marketing. I worked for GE in their power business for about 4 years across multiple product lines. I studied environmental engineering and I have my MBA, and just have a passion for growing businesses, for marketing, for new ways of doing business more efficiently, more sustainably. And when kind of the COVID pandemic really kind of, we started feeling it in the consulting business with a lot of our big clients, helping them think through questions they were facing. One thing that we asked ourselves in Oliver Wyman is, what can we do to help share some of these insights, tools, and frameworks with local businesses in our communities? So that kind of brought me to SCORE, which has put out some phenomenal resources for small businesses to see how could we help from a management consulting point of view to help the community. So that's kind of just a quick background on my involvement, my background, and the collaboration with SCORE.
Willie, who is Willie? Willie was born in Belgium, been a CEO of $6 billion companies and 4 startups, all in 10 different industries. My claim to fame is to make people work. I have 5 masters, speak 8.5 languages, and lived in 5 countries. I had 20,000 people working for me or me working for them as servant leader. And I've had businesses, manufacturing plants in 186 countries around the world. So I'm Mr. International. I've been living in Houston for 20 years, been the chairman of the Belgian Chamber of Commerce, Texas, chairman of the May International Trade Development Council. And I joined SCORE roughly a year ago. I became the VP of Outreach pretty quickly. And my role now at SCORE is to reach out to the community and talk to as many organizations that I can find in order to offer our services. Everything that we do at SCORE is free and confidential. And we help every year between 5,000 and 6,000 companies to start up here in Houston. So I think we do a reasonably good job. We have a very good team, work very well together. 90% of our people have run their own business in large organizations or in startups. And our objective is basically to help any young entrepreneur starting up or in business for 2, 3, 4 years, to help them change their marketing, grow their business, or in this case with the COVID, try to protect their business from the falling trees. And up to you.
Thanks, Willie. So just to touch briefly on who is Oliver Wyman, as some of you may be the first time you've heard that name before, we're a management consulting firm that's part of a larger parent company called Marsh & McLennan, with different businesses in risk and reinsurance and organizational consulting and economic consulting. So Oliver Wyman has about 5,000 employees in around 50 cities globally. I've included a snapshot of some of our key clients, and we play in quite a few different industries and bring a wide range of functional expertise to our clients. I myself am in the energy practice, but in blue, I've highlighted 3 practices that we really tapped to develop the content in this guidebook. So our healthcare and life sciences group has done a lot of research and modeling around coronavirus cases and projections. Our financial services group has done some modeling looking at impact of different sectors to the economy. And then our retail and consumer products group has done some research on consumer trends. So we'll bring those to light in this guidebook, but just wanted a brief snapshot of who Oliver Wyman is and some of the brains and effort behind the scenes that put this guidebook together. So I'll go ahead and advance to our first section. We'll start with just a few trends, both kind of macroeconomics and then customer trends that may be relevant for small businesses in restaurants in the Houston area. So Oliver Wyman has actually a free, publicly available tool called the Pandemic Navigator. You can just Google Oliver Wyman Pandemic Navigator. This was developed by our health and life sciences team to actually forecast the number of new and cumulative coronavirus cases over nearly 40 countries. So this takes in a variety of geographic and demographic factors. It looks at things like transmission rates, mobility, and really tries to learn from experiences from other countries as well that were earlier kind of in the time horizon of the coronavirus pandemic. And so that's one tool that just looks at kind of overall case projections. And what our financial services group did was to take those projections for coronavirus cases and actually how is that going to impact different sectors of the economy. So, you know, there's a lot we don't know about coronavirus and how it's transmitted and what that might look like over the next year. But the financial services group put together a range of scenarios of specifically what the recovery might look like for food service businesses. So on the right side, there's kind of 3 scenarios that have been laid out here. In one scenario, that smart and lucky really is kind of saying we can contain future outbreaks. We've kind of seen the peak, and it's just kind of a slow, gradual recovery and return to normalcy over the next year. So that really sees similar behavior starting to climb end of 2020 into 2021 with a full recovery to kind of pre-COVID revenues by the end of 2021. Then in a mid-range scenario, so in the light blue, a plausible but optimistic, this scenario models, there may be some localized cases, there may be some smaller scale lockdowns. So you see, potentially there may be a few more dips into 2021. And in this scenario, we see the food sector, and this is for the US in general, food sector kind of revenues recovering to 70% of the pre-COVID baseline. So that's kind of your mid-range scenario. And then kind of in the most pessimistic scenario where maybe we haven't seen the peak yet, there's future outbreaks or things that we discover that create more risks and more outbreaks and more shutdowns. We'll have a little bit of a lumpier recovery. And in that situation, we'll feel the impacts into 2021 with revenues rebounding to about 50% of current levels. So I think this type of modeling we've provided to a lot of clients, even governments, to help them hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And I think the key takeaway here is, expect a slow and gradual recovery, and certainly the possibility of a future lockdown over the next year. So again, no crystal balls here, but just some context on the overall recovery for food service. The other data point we wanted to highlight, and this again is from the Pandemic Navigator, is as you all know, infections in Harris County are expected to rise through July. So we kind of project over the next 2 weeks, and despite kind of early success in containment, Texas is on a trajectory to have the second largest case count in the US by mid-July, and about 20% of that coming from Harris County, just due to population. So, this, I think, it's important to note that if there is increased adherence to social distancing guidance, this case rate will likely fall. And, I think ensuring the safety of your families, employees, and customers is critical over this next month. So just wanted to highlight that and encourage you to check out the Pandemic Navigator tool if you'd like to learn more on this. So going on to kind of more consumer sentiment, how is the coronavirus impacted how consumers spend money, how they eat? Oliver Wyman issued a survey fairly early on in about April to a representative sample of Americans. And they were really looking at, this was our retail consumer and goods group, looking at the trend of grocery stores and what that means, but some interesting takeaways for restaurants that I wanted to highlight here. I think the first piece is that, with the economic downturn, many, high unemployment, there is likely to be a sustained decrease in disposable income and sustained decreases in consumption over the next 6 months and beyond. So that's certainly, I think, a headwind for any business in this environment, as I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. We have, looking at overall grocery spend, again, this was earlier days in the pandemic, so over a third, 37% of consumers were spending more on groceries. This has leveled off maybe a little bit as the pandemic has continued. But I think one interesting change in habit I wanted to highlight here on the far right side is that about half of the consumers expect to cook more at home. So certainly if people aren't going into the office, they may not be grabbing the sandwich or salad from the shop next door. They may have more time with less, less time spent commuting. So the home cooking trend, I think, and even the buying locally trends are two that as a restaurant you can think through. How do you kind of tap into that consumer sentiment and think through how to adapt? So that being said, with the trend home cooking, I think there always will be a market for the convenience and comfort and taste of a restaurant experience, and even takeout delivery options. So within the guidebook, we have a little more detail as well on consumer preferences specific to restaurants. And nothing too surprising here. The main criteria when selecting a restaurant for customers was cleanliness and hygiene. And so that was kind of top of mind for customers. Again, traditional takeout delivery options will continue probably to be safe bets for your business, and more customers were interested in take and bake options and home cooking options. So we'll bring up forth some more specific ideas on these trends in particular, but wanted to just kind of set some context there with a little bit of data as well. So we'll transition to the next section. This is kind of more practical tips, and both over immediate and long term, so out to kind of 2 years. We'll start with, kind of the basics. Again, 4 months into the pandemic, the first question you may want to ask is how are you doing right now? Should you stay open? And this is obviously a very difficult question to ask, but I think given the slow gradual recovery and potentially rebounding to 70% of pre-COVID revenues, can you adapt your cost structure? Can you find different sources of revenue? How can you really stabilize your cash flow to continue to sustain your business? And then can you continue to handle increased volume and delivery and pickup orders just to kind of hedge against risks of future lockdowns and decreased customers actually being able to come into the restaurant? And where there are customers can come in, can your restaurant be adapted to bring customers inside and adhere to social distancing guidelines? So just kind of some core fundamental questions. We'll bring forward some ideas and levers you can think through in terms of growing your revenues and stabilizing your cash flows, but also wanted to highlight on the right side, there's a lot of really good resources on SCOR's website, kind of on these different levers you can pull, some quick hit tips in terms of checklists, in terms of cash flow, tools to model your cash flow, and really where there's, loans or government assistance, what is your strategy there? How does it fit into your overall cash flow? So I think this is a fundamental time to really take a good hard look at some of these questions, look at your cash flow. And of course, there's a lot of very unique individual situations. So that would be a good plug to reach out to a SCOR mentor for additional support to help you think through some of these questions. So we started there, and then, we hope you all stay open, and we love our small businesses in Houston and restaurants that make the city so unique. So if you've decided we're staying open, one other tool you might think about at this point in time is what's kind of a traditional business analysis called a SWOT analysis. So this looks at your strengths, your weaknesses, and then any opportunities and threats your restaurant might have. So we've kind of played out one example here to kind of think through of what kind of questions to ask. And the purpose of this exercise, you may have done one when you opened your restaurant. It's just really to kind of write down and prioritize what are you really good at, what opportunities do you have, and how do you supercharge those? And then where are your weak points? Where are possible threats or risks, and how do you mitigate and neutralize those? So it's a tool really to prioritize where you focus your efforts on the ways to best adapt and strengthen your business. So this is always just a helpful grounding tool, because you can't do everything, but you can do probably one or two things. So this is a tool to help you prioritize. So just wanted to highlight that as a good practice, maybe a good time to do a COVID focused SWOT analysis. I think another critical piece for restaurants is health and sanitation. And this is not the focus of our guidebook. There's a lot of very comprehensive resources available. And I'm sure if you own a restaurant, you're probably more familiar with these than Willie and I will be. But really, I think the key takeaways here are to stay up to date with the latest guidance from federal, from CDC. The governor's office recently issued some, new guidelines for reopening. Restaurant Association guidelines, OSHA guidelines. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of good checklists and resources. It may be prudent to have one employee who's dedicated to stay on top of the latest guidelines, make sure you allocate proper budget in terms of time, additional materials you might need to properly sanitize. So I think this is one area that's critical to get right. If you've decided to stay open, your differentiation, ensuring a strong strategy in this topic is critical. So one other trend we wanted to highlight and bring kind of a tool to think through is the curbside operations. So we're seeing a lot of restaurants with the tents, with different protocols for curbside pickup for restaurants who may not have a traditional drive-through type model. So I think the most important things here on curbside is, have you really mapped the traffic flow to make sure it's optimal, and particularly from the perspective of the customer? Where do they come in? Where do they go? Is there clear signage indicating where they wait? Is the staging area adequately close so they can see, who will be approaching them, and have they put their make and model of their car in beforehand so you quickly can associate the order with the car? And then where you have in-restaurant dining, where those folks park. So I think here it's just really understanding and utilizing your space as efficiently as possible, kind of going from the perspective of the customer to make sure that this is a clear and good customer experience. I think if you have a new customer who is trying out a curbside order for the first time and they have a poor experience, you may only get one shot to get it right. So I think spending some time to think this through, to map this out, is important. And one other thing you might consider in the orange box is some restaurants offer curbside ordering as well. This could be a great way to capture more impulse customers who are driving by, and just clearly kind of having signage of, if you want to order, if somebody's ordering and there's pens or exchange of menus, how do you ensure proper sanitation between different customers? So again, that might be an area where you can capture some additional impulse customers. And again, just having clear protocol, clear signage, and having these operations adequately staffed are critical. So one other trend we've been seeing, and this capitalizes on the home cooking trends, are some of these home ingredient kits, home cooking kits, take and bake meal options, even cocktail making kits, even offering groceries at cost, or boxes of produce and various specialty items. So I think there's a great opportunity here to think through how your customers, how their behaviors have changed. If they're cooking from home, what kind of offerings can you provide to them that really add to that convenience, that taste, and that value that they're looking for? I think a couple other benefits of considering one of these type programs is you can actually utilize more remote employees for things like planning, logistics, operations. I think the more that you can figure out how to leverage your workforce remotely will help kind of make your business more resilient as well. So we put together kind of a checklist here on the right side, and there's a little more examples within the guidebook around kind of what we're seeing. But I think the main takeaways here would be, you can really creatively leverage things like social media to test out ideas, to get early feedback on some of these. So, think through those ways that you can really connect with your customers and develop the right offerings. And then the second takeaway is, how can you build these out beyond just kind of a one and done into more of a part of your offering, and maybe something that a customer, okay, part of my meal planning, I do a box from this restaurant, or we do a pizza once a week, or we do a cocktail on Fridays, and building out the stickiness of those programs. Is it a subscription? Do you offer a discount if they buy 4? So thinking through, how do you operationalize these types of programs? What works? And is this going to be part of your offering going forward? Maybe something to consider as well on these, but certainly a lot of creativity out there. And I myself have done a few of these boxes and have really enjoyed the experience. So just to kind of round out the practical tips section, we've highlighted a few considerations over the next 3 to 12 months, and then over the next 1 to 2 years. I think, there's kind of 4 areas here on your business model, your cost structure, your workforce, and then broader community. So on the business model, what are those ways to really, what revenues are realistic, and how do you sustain those? So things like maximizing returns from takeout and delivery. If you have an ordering, if customers can order directly from your website, you can minimize third-party fees, but electively use third-party ordering sites to reach new customers. So thinking through which ways, you have 4 months of data, has your takeout and delivery increased, and how do you sustain that level of service? If you're offering grocery items, is that something that will continue to be part of your offering, that there's sustained consumer demand? And then when you're bringing customers back into the restaurant, how do you make it as contactless and stress-free as possible for your customer? As you think through your costs as well, what are those revenues that you expect over the next 3 to 12 months? And then how can you adjust your cost structure? So obviously a big one is rent, and we'll hear a little more from Willie on that in terms of how can you really put creative ideas in place with your landlord and work with them to decide the best way forward to manage that. And then wherever you have, inventory cost decisions to make, supplier decisions, how can you adjust those, consolidate as needed, renegotiate as needed to adjust for changing demand. On workforce, again, wherever you can kind of tap into and leverage remote workers, whether it's more on the logistics of online orders, deliveries, inventory planning, fulfillment. There may be additional training and capabilities needed for employees to contribute working from home, but that will certainly be a trend hitting every sector, just kind of given the uncertainty of what future cases might look like. And then finally, just to kind of round out the short-term tips, I think right now, there's a great opportunity to consider partnerships with other small businesses for cross-promotion, to reach and really reach a different set of customers that may not be familiar with your business. How can you work together if you are a donut shop and you have a coffee shop next door to kind of share and combine offerings to best kind of stabilize revenues or reach new customers. And, you know, in any stressful moment where you're challenged, just really staying consistent with your core mission and the quality and service that your best customers expect. Every customer could be, you know, your future best customer. So just maintaining that adherence to quality and service. And then over the next 1 to 2 years, this kind of builds on some of the themes we've already talked through, but certainly just to be aware of the impact of kind of the sustained economic downturn on your customer base. What does that look like for your revenues and for your business? And then where you may have proposed successful promotions or new offerings, how do you embed those permanently into your operations? So do you have a subscription service? Are there specialty grocery items that customers have really responded to that you could expand? This point too, you know, there may be cash flow needs to cover anything you've deferred in terms of payments or bills. Opportunity to revisit or renegotiate supplier contracts. And I think a continued cost to budget for would be, what are the sustained and structural measures to support cleanliness and hygiene? Again, as that being kind of forefront of mind, a no regrets option for the next year to strengthen your business. And then finally, just kind of on the community connections, if you're having less customers actually come into your restaurant, considering those ways you stay in touch with your customers and stay kind of attuned to their sentiment, what they're liking in terms of new products, what you can do more of, what you can do less of. So whether that's more frequent surveys, whether that's a broader social media presence, how do you really have two-way communication with your customers? I think a lot of companies are asking, what does the new normal look like? When do we get out of this and what does it look like? And I think to a certain extent, you can help define that with your customers. What kind of offerings do they like? What are you doing well? What can you do more of? So would really encourage you to use some of these ideas and tools and chart your own path to the new normal. So again, we have kind of some more detail within the guidebook around these, but these are just some of the high level kind of from immediate to longer term practical tips that we wanted to kind of bring forward on this forum. So with that, I'll pass it off to Willie to talk a little bit about perspectives from local restaurateurs.
Thanks, Anne. Good job. The thing to think about in practice is think about the different types of restaurants that you see in a city like Houston. You have the fast foods, and they react very differently than the other types of restaurants. Fast foods are volume driven. You spend very little time sitting down in a restaurant, and even in the past, a lot of us were just driving by and pick up a coffee or pick up a sandwich and eating in our cars or when we were busy or running between meetings. What we see today is fast foods are not doing that bad because they rely basically on people that don't want to take the time or the sophistication to make their own food. Let's keep in mind that a lot of people in the US cannot even cook, so they have to go to some places to eat some food. So the fast food industry is not complaining that much for the moment in general. The family restaurants, that's a different story. That's where you go with your spouse, your children, or sometimes to meet a friend or to have a coffee with somebody or like lunch or even a dinner at night. Those are suffering a lot because there's a lot of fear in the community and people don't like to mingle and be close to other people. So those restaurants have seen quite a downturn. Even worse is the business restaurant. There are very, very few business restaurants who are open for the moment, and the ones who are open have very low pass-through. The reason for that is that a lot of people are working from home, very little international travel or even interstate travel. So there's not a reason to go to take a partner from California to go and have a good lunch or a good dinner because he's not coming. He's staying over and you meet with him over the internet, virtually. And then the ones that are the worst hit are the events restaurant. There are, for the moment, very few graduations, very few weddings, very few big events, conferences and so on. And those restaurants focusing on those events are basically shut down for the moment. I don't know of a single one in Houston that's still operating. Go ahead, Anne. A couple of things to consider over and above what Anne taught you about, and things that are rather important not to underestimate. In a closed environment where you sit down for an hour and a half, ventilation is crucial. Wherever you have a closed environment, you take air from the outside, move it through the inside and reject it back to the outside. If there's any COVID or any bacteria or any virus in the air outside, it will somehow get concentrated when it gets inside and it will stay and float around, and you have a risk of infecting a lot of people. So what we recommend to a lot of people who look at that is there are some HEPA filters and some other filters that can be looked at to see if you can reduce the risk. We've also seen people putting UV lights in their ventilation system just to make sure that every piece of air that goes inside the building is sanitized. UV has a good capacity of killing a lot of viruses. We've also seen cleaning companies using handheld UV lights to go over surfaces and look hooks and crannies to make sure that they clean as much viruses out of any portion that might otherwise be overlooked. We've seen a lot of restaurants also being creative with isolation, plexiglass separation between the tables. I've even seen one where they've put shower curtains between the tables. Sometimes they go out and crazy, but it's not a bad thing to think about. The best things I've seen, best solutions is outdoors. A restaurant had something like 37 tables inside. They had a pretty large parking lot. They cornered off a piece of the parking lot and they put 20 tables outside. And people having a kind of picnic outside with the weather we have in Houston is not a bad idea. I even had a guy that went to the mayor and said, look, my restaurant is just in front of a little park. Would you allow me to put some tables in the park and have people have picnic outside? And the mayor said, in those circumstances, yes, why not? And he did that, and he's very successful. People love it. They like to go to this place because it's open air, much less risk. And then you have some special cases. I'll give a little stories at the end of my speech, but special cases are people who used to do catering for conferences, expos, big companies, big events. Especially enough, they have not seen that much of a downturn, because think about it, a hospital has a cafeteria. It's probably closed today because of the risk of infection. And a lot of restaurants are being called up to cater because people still have to eat at noon, even in the evening during shifts. So a lot of restaurants we've seen have pivoted to catering, and that is an interesting phenomenon. Next one, Anne. Give you an example of, we visited in the last couple of months a lot of different restaurateurs, friends that we have in the industry that we know. And I'm going to give you an example of one guy that has done a very interesting report for us with a lot of details about what he's gone through and what he's really looking for. And this is a high-end restaurant. It's one of the best restaurants in town. Very fine dining. For 10 weeks, he's seen 35 customers, while previously he had 150, 200, 250 customers per day, something like 10,000 in the last 10 weeks. So imagine the drop of revenue. He offered to all his employees to stay and be paid. Some employees demanded to go home and stay safe with their family, and that's fine. And he basically spent $250,000 in the last 10 weeks to just keep his employees on hand. Luckily, he had a pretty solid investor committed. There's a friend who was a banker also. And he put some money on the table to help sustain the restaurant. And then he and his investors spent quite some time applying for PPL and EADL. They got the max out of those programs, and that helped short term, certainly paying for the employee salaries and some of the cost of the restaurant, but not enough. Without revenue to help, it's not enough to sustain long term. So he's at 10 weeks. He says he can last probably another 5 weeks, maybe 2 months, but then he will really have to look seriously about potentially closing. His cost is still high because he has a pretty high fixed cost compared to his variable cost, and his revenue is still very low. So cash flow is absolutely. One of the things that we helped him to do, for example, is to really write down a detailed cash flow projection. He's a good operator. He knew his finances, but he never had focused on the cash flow as much as he's focusing now. And he realizes that's the key to everything. Cash is king. So your cash flow is a document you should look at every single day, adapt it every single day, keep it up. The other thing that he was pretty open with us also is about as an owner and responsible for some people and a business, how do you not lose your sanity when you go through something like that, and a complete turnover of your business from very successful to zero, basically. And in the guide, you'll find a detailed checklist of everything that he has gone through during his 10 weeks. And Anne, can you show that list? It's probably the next one. Yeah, that one. Those are considerations that he's looked at. How to deal with your landlord if you rent space. Can you get some deferrals from him? Can you get 3 months without rent and increase your 3 months at the end of your rent period? How can you work with your landlord? Can you pay him half now and half later? Depending on the kind of landlord, if it's an individual or if it's a corporation, those things are difficult to negotiate. So next is with your vendors. You were buying so many pounds of meat, so many pounds of this or that, and all of a sudden you buy nothing anymore. How do you cancel these long-term contracts you had in place in some cases? Is it possible to spend some partial payment to cover his cost but not his profit? How do you keep this relation going? Because one day you're going to reopen and you're going to need these vendors to be there and to support you. So it's a balance. Next is revolving bills. You still have plenty of things to pay for: your rent, your electricity, utilities, your gas, your phone, your internet, your marketing. All that still is there as bills. So how do you deal with all that? And then you have your employees. How do you keep the morale? How do you keep the people busy? What he did in this case, for example, the first 3 or 4 weeks, they cleaned the restaurant from up and down. They repaired everything. They replaced all stuff. They did things that were on their mind already for quite some time, and they kept their people busy for 2 or 3 weeks. But what do you do after that when you have little to do? And then about your customers. How do you reach out to your customers? How do you try to attract them to come back to you and to even come in? How do you alleviate the fear? How do you bring back the trust? Reaching out to old customers that you know, reaching out to new customers, using social media, using different marketing tools and techniques. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of time. But he put his team, his employees to the task, and that's how they got through it so far. And then you have other situations. You have people who have loans. How do you pay your loans, or how you even keep up with your interest? What about taxes? You have no choice. You have to pay those, otherwise they shut you down. So, and then personally, he's been in business for 35 years. He's never seen anything like that. How do you stay focused? How do you not lose your sanity? How do you think about being creative in a situation like that? How do you communicate? How do you inform everybody that what is happening? How do you create things? Because you have to be creative in those situations. How do you pivot? How do you look at things from a different perspective? So you'll see in the guide, there's a lot of detail about things you have to think about. And this is a good case of somebody that went through 10 weeks of hell, basically, and is coming out on the other side, a little bit better, in a better situation, but still very much under the weather. So, Anne, if you can go back 1 or 2 slides. That one, yeah. Here's a case of another restaurateur. It's a lady. She is in charge of a general manager of a bakery, a French bakery on Westheimer. And from one day to the next, traffic went from 500-600 clients a day to 0. It's a French bakery, so they do a lot of croissants and cookies and chocolates and all kinds of funny things like the one you see in the pictures there. So the first reaction was panic. Very nervous employees. What do we do now? Are you going to fire us? So she set up a lot of meetings, communications with their people. They brainstormed about ideas. They redecorated the space. They opened up the space. They moved the chairs and the tables. They opened up the patio. And then she put her people to work on the marketing on social media. She created pamphlets. She had some of her people deliver them to the buildings around her location, even as far as a mile, 2 miles sometimes. She changed the menu. She changed the message. She changed the service. She allowed people to order online and to go and pick up, and she was delivering outside the store rather than inside. And then something that she found very interesting, if you think about it, a lot of companies, take a hospital, they usually have a cafeteria where you can go and eat. Most of these places, especially the buffet places, are closed. So she was getting more and more calls for catering, and then she pivoted her marketing campaign towards doing more catering, more delivery, even more Zoom cooking classes and things like that. And funny enough, she had tremendous response to that. So that was part of the creativity, not only of herself, but also of her team. And they were coming back. First, the intrepid customers, and then slowly the people from the community. And she kept going. And today she's running at 110% of pre-COVID revenue. And she's relaxing, and she thinks that she has done a good job. But without her employees and the creativity of the people, she would not have made it. So that's a good success. Next. And then a couple of stories. One restaurant faced the same problems, and he said, why don't I pivot completely to delivery? And he signed up for 10 delivery experts like Uber Eats, DoorDash, and companies like that. And today he's doing 130% of his pre-COVID volume. So there he took a complete different attitude. He increased his prices because the cost of transportation, the delivery, the packaging, and so on. But people don't seem to be complaining. Give you a tale of 2 French bakeries. You heard a story about one French bakery on Westheimer. There's another one on Westheimer, just a mile away from there. And the 2 had very different behaviors. The story you just heard was a general manager who was creative, worked with his team, was a good leader. And the other bakery a mile away is an older gentleman in his late 50s. He didn't do anything. He just sat there moaning, and he's now closed. So it depends on the leader, on the manager, on the creativity on the pivoting capability and your attitude, basically. And then think about the food buffets like the Lubies that just went bankrupt, some of the Chinese restaurants or Japanese restaurants who are focusing on buffet. They have difficulty. Some of them have closed because of the risk and the liability that they're facing. I taught you the little story of the restaurant near a park. He asked the city, the mayor, and he got the permission to set up tables in the park. Coaching people to cook at home. The lady I talked to you about has done a lot of Zoom cooking classes and coaching and helping people with baking at home, how to bake a cake, how to bake this, how to bake that. She even sent some of her people out to help people barbecuing at home. People who didn't know, they had a barbecue at home, but they never used it. They didn't know how to use it. And she's even organizing some home events. A family wanted to do a graduation party, and she cooked all the food and served at their home, which was quite different than what she had done before. And then something I found out yesterday, the Fed is working on a relief package for restaurants, for independent restaurants of $120 billion, similar to what they've done for the airline industry and some other industries. But that's coming. It's not voted yet. It's in discussion. It might go up, it might go down, but at least everybody seems to be in agreement that the hospitality industry has suffered the most and needs some federal help. So that's coming. Let's hope we'll see some of that. Next one, Anne. Yeah, next one. Next one. Okay. Here we try to put together a list of available resources that you can find on different places. There's a lot. I ask you to look at it if you're interested. Go to see OSHA, the Governor Guide, the National Restaurant Association, the Great Eastern Partnership does a very good job. At SCORE, we have a library about emergency preparedness, back to business, list of things to consider, cash flow models, even checklist about reopening your restaurant, and an action guide that will be available in a couple of weeks. There's a lot of resources available, and if you have difficulty understanding some of these resources or using some of these resources, you can always reach out to a SCORE counselor. Everything we do is free and confidential. And we have, at least in SCORE Houston, 3 or 4 people who have run their own restaurant or own their own restaurant and can talk to you in detail about what to do, not to do, how to pivot in your situation. So don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll help you with all of that. Next. Question and answers. In the Q&A box, I found a couple of questions from Robert. He asked about trends in catering. I think I just explained that a lot of cafeterias in offices, in hospitals, in other places, like in the tunnels underground, are closed. And people still have to eat. So when you are in the Shell building and you have a meeting with 20 people, you cannot just go down in the tunnel and have a meal, or you usually will call somebody and have it catered. So catering in most cases that we've talked to has increased compared to pre-COVID. So that's a good trend. Robert was also asking about the trends in the wedding industry. That is going to be a down for quite some time. The events restaurants are really down. Most of the hotels have no conventions, no graduations, no weddings. If there's a wedding, it's always in small quantities, small groups, and usually not in big spaces, not in big conference halls. So I think that's going to be probably a delay of 6 months in that industry. But once everything is cleared, the people are going to wed. There's no doubt about that. It's something that's going to explode later on.
Yeah, Willie, on catering, I would just add, we used a fundraising site within my office called Give in Kind, and that actually facilitates delivery of meals to healthcare workers. So some local restaurants have kind of promoted themselves as, okay, we're close to this restaurant if somebody wants to do fundraising. So that's another, I think, theme that Willie brought up in terms of catering to hospitals, and that website is one in particular that could be somewhere to get consider getting your restaurant's name out there if you're close to a hospital to be well positioned to cater.
Next question is for you, Anne. Robert was asking if, what do we think about and what do we see in terms of surcharges for more cleaning, delivery costs, things like that. Are the customers really worried about that? Are they concerned, or are they just going with the flow?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in some of the consumer surveys is there is more concern about cleanliness and hygiene for the most part. I think this is an area I've heard colleagues say, even when you're at a restaurant, someone sneezes, there's some anxiety there. So ensuring proper distancing, sanitation, and just making those protocols clear, I think, is a no regrets option. Obviously, every consumer is going to have a different level of comfort and risk threshold, and some may be more finicky. The finicky ones may be staying home, but I think this is one area where erring on the side of being a little kind of over careful and ensure that the transparency around the different sanitation practices you're taking are clear to customers, so that if that is a tipping point of, will I go into the restaurant or not? And I know that there's a dedicated person that wipes down the table. I know there's sanitation stations that may help with some more wary customers and kind of encouraging them to get back into a restaurant.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that is that most people that go to restaurants are what I call the intrepid people who are not fearful. They're usually also not too concerned about the cost of what they do. They go for the experience, for the camaraderie with people, with friends, or with family. And even at home, I don't think people worry too much if there's $1 or $2 more on their bill because of delivery or additional cost of. The thing I worry more is about the restaurant itself, who has higher cost of raw materials because they buy in smaller quantities, or the cost of meat has gone up, or availability of some ingredients might not be as high as it was before. So that's probably a concern on that side. I'm not too concerned about the price towards the customer. The customer is going to go with the flow. He doesn't have much alternative anyway for the moment. I see that we have opened the polls, so make sure you go to the polls and give us some feedback as to what we are doing and how we've done it. Let's see, was there another question? Yeah, interesting question about how long do you think this pandemic is going to last? And
yeah, I think from the models that we're running, and again, I think looking in the crystal ball, there's multiple scenarios that can unfold, but I think most of kind of our data and mindset is expecting to feel an impact into next year. And so what exactly that looks like in terms of cases, where cases may flare up again, where containment is more effective, that'll certainly be factors that'll impact how long the downturn will be felt. But I think it's probably a safe bet to assume that into next year there'll be some impacts, certainly in terms of things like discretionary spending, consumer confidence, when do kind of the more normal ways of operating kind of kick back in, and normal behaviors. I think we'll expect to see that into next year.
I have two more questions to go to. One was about what is the most creative pivot you have seen so far? And I shared with Anne a picture I found a couple of weeks ago of somebody who had a restaurant, a parking lot behind the restaurant, and in the middle of the parking lot, a tremendous tree, very old tree. And what he had done, he had hung a couple of canvases from the tree and had made basically remote picnic areas hanging from the tree. Very romantic, very interesting. And Anna and I even laughed about maybe we'll go and have a cocktail there one day. So that was the most creative that we've seen. And the other question was about PPP and EIDL. There's a lot of confusion out there in the market about how to use them, about repayment, and so on and so on. At SCORE in Houston, we have a group of 10 people that we've dedicated to answer all these questions on PPP and EIDL, and we work very close with the SBA, and most of the banks are doing the PPP. And this group of 10 people, together with the SBA, do 6 or 7 webinars every week about all the different aspects of the PPP and EIDL program. So I encourage you to reach out to SCORE or to the SBA directly and go on some of these webinars and learn as much as you want. And then if you have some further questions after that, join us at SCORE and we'll put one of these 10 people face-to-face with you or virtually over Zoom, and we'll go to your questions one by one. Some of these people in that group of 10 speak to 7, 8, 10 customers, clients per day. They're very busy, but reach out, we can help you. Okay, we have one more poll going on. Yeah, that's it as far as I'm concerned. Anne, you have anything to add?
No, I would just add maybe one more creative idea I've seen, and I think there's simple things you can do too. One of our favorite bakeries posts kind of the pastry of the day, and you can actually just send them an Instagram message and say, "Ooh, can you put one aside for me?" So I think those ways to build out kind of a quick two-way communication and get your offerings visible a lot more. People are spending more time on social media, so I think that's another simple creative idea that I've seen, and I think coming out of this we'll see a lot more creativity, and hopefully this got some ideas kind of churning in your head that might be helpful.
Thank you. I think as we are reaching the end of our session here, I want to thank Anne for the good work that she's put together and her team on this guide. The guide will be available on the Oliver Wyman website in a couple of weeks, and we'll share the link with all the participants in a week or so. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or desire to talk with somebody who has been in the business or who can help you with different aspects, reach out to Anne and to myself, and we'll be more than happy to help you. So until then, have a good time. Have fun. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody. Stay safe. Thanks, Willie.